Hello, everyone. My name is Father Roy Lee. I'm from the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I'm residing in Atlanta, Georgia. I'd like to share with you a little bit of my background, which is a mixture of so many different things in ministry. I am a homiletics professor here for the Archdiocese of Atlanta. I work with the permanent deacons. I am involved with jail ministry and homeless ministry. I also am involved with evangelization around the country, doing missions and retreats and revivals and workshops. And I'm also involved with educational workshops because that's my background. I also have a website. If you'd like to join me on my website at frroylee.com. Again, frroylee.com. My ministry helps me to kind of get a real wonderful broad vision of God's hand at work in so many different areas. And so I am really excited about this moment that we're going to have. I look forward in seeing you, having some interaction with you as we discuss this wonderful and hot topic. Where do we go from here? African American Catholics in the 21st century, while empowering each other to move forward in this moment in time in history. Thank you for joining us, and let us move forward now with this podcast. Hey, welcome to our first podcast, folks. I'm really excited that we have this opportunity as what we call, where do we go from here? African American Catholics in the 21st century. And today we have Dr. Cecilia Moore. I'm excited to have her on board with us. She's our first. She is a graduate, I would say magna cum laude from Sweetbriar College with an AB in History and Religion from the University of Virginia with an MA and a PhD in American Religious History. Now, she's taught at the University of Dayton in the Department of Religious Studies since 1996 and at Xavier University of Louisiana in the Institute for Black Catholic Studies, where I had the opportunity, wonderful pleasure of working with her at the IBCS. Now, her area of specialization in U.S. Catholic history, and currently she's working on the history of Black conversion to Roman Catholicism in the 20th century. And in addition to publishing in numerous scholarly and popular journals, Dr. Moore has co-edited Songs of Our Hearts and Meditations of Our Souls, Prayers for Black Catholic, published by St. Anthony Messenger Press in 2006. So she comes as with a PhD from the University of Virginia in American Religious History and an MA from the University of Virginia, American Religious History, and an AB from Sweetbriar College, History and Religion. So she's a scholar, and she is a wonderful human being to just to know and to have this conversation with us. So thank you for being here, Dr. Moore.
Thank you, Father Roy. I'm pleased to be with you today. It's an honor to get to spend some time talking with you about Black Catholic history.
Thank you. And, I want to say what precipitated this. And there's been a conversation with African American Catholics in terms of many of us can only go back maybe 2 or 3 generations, possibly 4. To find out, where did we come from in terms of the motherland? And I know I took the ancestry DNA and I had a chance to kind of do some of that history. But when we talk about our African American Catholic, let's say spirituality, religion, as Roman Catholics, I want to talk about a conversation that so many are having now about, where do we fit in this journey in the Catholic Church in America as African American Catholics? If you can just walk us through very briefly, I know we don't have hours, but I want you to help us unfold, peel the layer of our movement to this country and how we settled in and how the Catholic Church became part of who we are on our spiritual journey.
All right. Well, that indeed is a very, very long story. Of course, we don't have time for the whole thing, but let me just I'll get us started with some examples, and then we can see where you want to go from there.
Yeah.
If we want to try to go back to like the earliest period of people of African descent who were also Catholic, we can start with the New World colonization of what we now consider to be the United States of America. And so I'm focusing on U.S. Catholic history because I think that's what you want me to do.
Yes, that's good.
So yeah, so that we can go back to that very early period where we know that there were both enslaved and also some free persons of African descent who were part of those early settlements that the Spanish were making here in what becomes the United States. So that we're talking about the 16th century, so 1500s.
Wow.
And a great place to look at how Blacks were there free and enslaved is in Florida, with St. Augustine, Florida, that being the oldest city established in what we now call the U.S. And we have the benefit of great sacramental records that show the presence of free and enslaved Black Catholics participating in the life of the church.
So what was their life, environment? You talk about slave and those who were not enslaved. How were they placed in the Catholic Church, and how did the Catholic Church see them, and how were they able to express who they are as African Catholics?
Well, can you give me a better sense of what you mean by placed? What do you mean by
what was their and I'm assuming because of the state of affairs of slavery, those who were freed, were they able to have access like white Catholics? Let's talk about the school system. Let's talk about
access. Well, in that earliest period, we would not see schools set up that early. Not see schools set up that early. But I think by looking at the sacramental records, we can see that we can know names, we can know relationships, we can know the parents of, for example, in the baptismal records, we can know who the parents were, we can know who the godparents were, we can know if the godparents were free or enslaved people. It was a very there wasn't like this radical separation between the free and the enslaved, or really even between those who were of African descent or the Europeans, because those records are really interesting because they show how complex the relationships were and how mixed the relationships were. So you can find enslaved children being godparented by free Blacks. You can find free Blacks who have who are godparenting for white children. There are all sorts of ways that we see relationships in those sacramental records. We also know that one thing that made Florida a place where we'd see a significant number of free Blacks is because the Spanish offered the opportunity for people who were enslaved in the areas above Florida that had been taken over by the English They made a practice of accepting those who could run away, who could escape and run down, get to Florida. If they agreed to become Catholic and also to support Spain in protecting itself from the English, then they would be given their freedom. And so that's how we see this growing free Black population. And so we've had people converting to Catholicism in that period of time. They even are able to establish their own settlement there. It's called Fort Mose. And it was a fort, but they also live there, and they're doing all sorts of really interesting archaeological research there, looking at how people lived. They know that there was a church there. They found, remnants of religious artifacts there. We know that priests were sent there to minister in Fort Mose. So, and again, this is a process that starts in the 16th century. Fort Mose was established, I think it is 1738. But
So what was their spirituality like? If they were able to settle in communities as freed and even the slaves in the Catholic Church, do we have a sense of what their spirituality was? It very much like every other Roman Catholic at that time, or was it something very unique because they were African?
I don't know. I gotta tell you, I don't know. We don't know. There are a lot of questions. There are still so many questions that left to be answered. So I cannot definitively say.
Yeah.
But what we can say is that their practice of Catholicism was alive. And I think that's important to know.
Yes, right.
That's important to know. But again, that's where like more research is being done, needs to be done to answer questions like that. Those are important questions, but they're really hard to pin down. Not impossible to pin down, but hard to pin down if we're looking at this historically, because we need to have what we would consider to be evidence.
Right.
To make the claim to like establish this is what the spirituality was.
Right.
We need to have something that we can look at. That's why I think the archaeological research at Fort Mose is interesting, because being able to identify, there was a church there, finding in the ruins, because eventually it was abandoned. It was routed and abandoned. So finding in the place remnants of the things that they used to practice their faith, I think is important.
Right.
But how African was it? I don't know. Right. We know that there were people of African descent.
Right.
And that it also shows, since we have records of people being baptized, married, as well as buried, that it was more than just something that they did to get freedom, because over generations, they persist in their Catholic faith.
Right.
So, two interesting books. One about marriage, and marriage and the descendants of those early Afro-Catholic Floridians, and another one about soldiers from that same Florida Catholic world by this man named Frank Marotti. So, there are a lot of people who are doing research and writing about that period. Spirituality, I think, is super important for us, but that's something that that doesn't often get written about because we can't say with certainty certain things.
Right. So as we move forward, and you mentioned priest, I guess there's two questions. The first one would be the acceptance of the Africans in the Roman Catholic Church in Florida, and that movement as it begins to grow and bringing more of our African brothers and sisters here. And so what kind of priests did they bring to minister? And then were they accepting of the African as they were part of the Catholic Church here in America?
Well, in the Florida colony, in the Spanish Florida colony, most of the priests there were Franciscans.
Mm-hmm.
And they were particularly on mission there to evangelize the indigenous people of Florida.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I keep going back to these records.
Right.
And so we can see from the records that Black people, people of African descent, were an active part of the Catholic world there. And, that's something I teach a class at the University of Dayton called U.S. Catholic Experience. And we look at the history of Catholicism starting in that Spanish period and moving forward. A lot of people will start the history with they'll start it with Maryland, the Maryland colony, because there's so much attention paid to Maryland being the Catholic colony, and that's true. It's I'm not going to take any of its importance away from it. It's true, and we see roots of early Black Catholicism in the Maryland experience too. But I think it's really important to start with Florida because that's really the earliest period. I have lost my train of thought. Sorry.
No, you answered the question in terms of Franciscans were sent there to evangelize. And, I remember Father Cyprian Davis, whom we both had an opportunity to know. He was my history professor. He wrote the book, The History of Black Catholics in the United States. Benedict, and there it is. That's the man. And I remember him telling us in class that as the slaves were coming over to America, that the Pope at that time had asked the American bishops to allow the slaves to have their own African church, their African priests, their African sisters. And I remember him telling us how the bishops ignored that. And I don't know if you
at the time in that colonial period.
Well, I don't remember the exact time, but I remember it was during the slave trade that he talked about that.
Okay, okay. One thing I think you might be thinking about. Definitely, we do have a pope in the 1830s who issues a condemnation of the slave trade.
Yes.
And that sets off a lot of conversation here. American bishops, who wanted to argue. So a couple of prominent ones really wanted to argue. One in particular that, the Pope is condemning slavery, the slave trade, but not what we do here. He's talking about other people, not what's going on here. But after the Civil War, there's an event called the Second Plenary Council of Baltimore, the year after the war is over. And in that, we see the Archbishop of Baltimore, who called together the bishops for that meeting. He had put together a proposal, and in his proposal, he recommended, and he wanted to get them to agree to ask the Vatican to appoint what he called a, quote, ecclesial man who would be responsible for organizing the evangelization of African Americans. And this person would be in charge of evangelization an evangelization effort that would be national. And a lot of bishops, the majority, it didn't happen because they got mad about that. They did not like that. They felt like that was going to be encroaching upon their territory, their sovereignty, that it would be someone from the outside telling them what they had to do. They didn't like that. Another thing he wanted to do was to work to establish what he called a native clergy. So Black priest for Black people. They said out, nope, they weren't interested in that. Essentially, the only thing that he could get them agree to was that it would be all right to ask some missionary orders to send priests to the United States to serve in Black communities. And that directly relates to the Josephites coming over to the United States in the 1870s as a mission. And they were a missionary community centered in England, but they were mostly doing their work in India and parts of Africa and the Far East. And they agreed that they would accept the United States as a mission territory.
Now, since we're in the
so maybe, I don't know if you were thinking about that.
Yes, and I think that was it as we move into the 1800s. And as we see then, the influx of African Americans becoming Catholic and the evangelization happening, they still didn't have full, let's say, citizenship or churchmanship in the Catholic Church. If you could talk and address the whole thing about vocations, we talk about indigenous clergy. How did that come about? Did it come about? And we could talk about Augustine Tolton, or you can bring up maybe the Healy brothers, if you can help us understand that whole development of indigenous clergy and the Black clergy.
Okay.
Religious life.
I would. Okay. Yeah. Sure. Let's talk about the Black clergy because, all right. So what I've been doing is sorting through a lot of stuff in my apartment. So I have boxes and boxes of documents, articles, all sorts of stuff that I've saved over the years, and so. You want me to say a little bit about the Healy brothers?
Yes.
I'll say something about the Healy brothers. They are a very fascinating American Catholic family. They are super interesting because I think it's 5 of the children, and I can't remember if there were 9 or 10. Sorry, I should know that. But 3 of them became priests and 2 became religious sisters. And but here's the thing: they were people of African descent. They were also technically slaves until the war was over, technically speaking, because they were never emancipated. Their father was their master. He had a relationship with one of his slaves. Her name was Eliza. And, talking about the further research that people are doing, one of the very wonderful things I think that's being done now is being done by an archivist and historian whose name is Barbara Miles, and she's made it her mission recently to try to find out as much as she possibly can about their mother. And she's found out some fascinating things about her. And she even has discovered, she has been able to publish a picture of the Healy brothers' mother, because she was able to get in contact with some of the descendants of the Healys. And this particular part of the family that she has come to know shared with her the picture that they have of Eliza. So we actually now have an image of their mom.
Wow.
And so anyway, they were born enslaved because your condition in the way that slavery was practiced in the U.S. Your condition is the condition of your mother. So if you have an enslaved parent, you're enslaved.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Okay.
their mother was enslaved. So they were slaves.
How did that work out though, in terms of three of them become priests and they had an enslaved mother? How were they able to work through that whole thing of priesthood?
Well, as soon as they were old enough to really go away, be sent away to school, they were sent up north to schools. The boys were sent to schools in Massachusetts, and the girls were sent to Canada. And they were accepted as white. Some of them, were very passable. Some were not particularly passable, but they're now in this world. And so that's how they were able to escape slavery,
Right.
active slavery. But also they had vocations. And so two of them became diocesan priest, and one of them became a Jesuit priest. And each one of these brothers that became a priest did distinctive things. One was a bishop.
Yes. Right.
One was a theologian and professor. Another one, the Jesuit, would actually become a president of Georgetown University.
Right. Exactly.
The one who would make it into a modern university. So, they're an exceptional case in the sense that, they have a very distinctive type of story, but
Right.
they did not live and work among African Americans. So that's then why we then look at Tolton and really think of Tolton as the first recognized Black priest.
Right. Tell us about Tolton. Tell us a little bit about Tolton.
I love the story of Father Tolton because I just feel like his whole life is about defying gravity. He's born a slave in Missouri. His mother takes him and his siblings. They run from slavery. They cross over into the free state of Illinois. Once they get there, life is very hard, but they are now in freedom. The war ends. They've been there and totally free now. But life is hard. They have to work very hard, but their mom is also determined for them to have education. Particularly, she wanted Catholic education for them. And along the way, there are some really great sisters and priests who help facilitate that, who help make that happen for the Toltons, and especially for Augustus Tolton, because he is identified as a person who has a vocation. And those folks who were working with him, the priests and sisters who were working with him, knew that if he was going to go to seminary, there were certain things he would need to be able to do. So they helped him. They helped him develop skills that would serve him well later when he ultimately did get to go to the seminary. But that's another thing that he has to defy, is getting into a seminary. Nobody's going to take him. Nobody wants him.
Right.
So
that's right.
So it's okay, well, what about the missions? Will the missions take me?
Yeah.
And yeah, the missions will take you. So then he goes to Rome. He studies at the Urban College.
Right.
He's all ready to go to Africa to serve, never come back to the United States again. Right before he is ordained, he finds out, guess what? You're going back home to Quincy. You're going to have a parish in
Right.
And so he goes back, and when he comes back, I talked about him in class today, and I said to my students, I was like, he's received like an ecclesial rock star when he comes back, because everybody's excited about there's a Black priest. There's never been one before. Well, there had been, we just didn't know it. And he's very obviously a Black man.
Yes,
and
he is. Right.
Loved people wherever he went. People were so happy to see him. They loved attending his masses. And so he starts a little mission church there in Quincy, intending to evangelize the African Americans there. Does win some converts. But other people start showing up to his church too. These white people start coming to his church, and they like it because he's very, I guess he preached very well. He sang very well. He was very nice. The Germans loved him because he was fluent in German, and they like people who can speak their language.
Right.
But that makes the white priest in town mad at him.
I was just going to say that.
And they harass him, and then ultimately he is in Chicago, defies gravity again, goes to Chicago. Part of the community of Quincy, Black Catholic community of Quincy, migrated with him to Chicago.
Wow.
And they're part of the nucleus of people who formed the first Black parish in Chicago.
Wow.
St. Monica's,
right.
Yeah, but that made me think, like I was telling you about my pile of documents. So I think that we've got a really great text on the history of the Joseph. It's really focused on the history of the Josephites, desegregating the altar. But I think the history of Black priests in the United States, that's an area where a lot of good work is still left to be done.
That's good to hear.
The Oaks book is great, but we need more books. And so I found this article called Native New York or Negro Priest. And it's about it's about the ordination of the Reverend Marcus Glover, PB. PB stands for the White Fathers.
Oh, okay, got you. Yeah.
He was a Black man. He grew up in New York
Precious
City.
blood.
No, not Precious Blood. The White brothers. The White Fathers. The PB.
Oh, okay.
The Paris Blanc. The Paris Blanc. Anyway, this Father Glover was from New York. Apparently he attended an interracial parish in New York, and grew up in this church, and had a vocation and experienced support from his local parish in pursuing priesthood. And according to my article here, he attended the Cathedral College, which is in New York. Then he studied in the novitiate of the Josephite Fathers in Newburgh, New York. Then he went to the Seminary of Quebec, and then he completed his training at the Seminary of the White Fathers in Carthage, Africa.
Wow. And what year we talking? What year?
He came home to be ordained, and guess how old he was?
How old was he?
26.
Wow.
All that by the time he's 26. And I mean, I know we're a podcast, so you can't see this, but I can show this to you.
Yeah. I see it. Yeah.
It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to know about him, right?
What year are we talking about?
This is 1937.
1937.
Now he would not serve here in the United States of America.
Right.
He was a mission priest, so
Yeah,
he
he's a
was
mission.
sent to Africa. He went and lived out his life as a priest in Africa.
Wow. Now,
So
I don't know.
there's lots of these stories of these priests in this
Yes.
early period, and it's not like you can like put them all in one place.
Right.
The
Exactly.
Josephites
Right.
are a big part of the
Yeah.
story. The
Yes.
Society
Yes.
of the Divine Word
Word.
Fathers are
That's
a big
correct.
part of the
That's right.
story.
That's right.
The Holy Ghost Fathers are
Fathers.
important. So
Yes.
there are many of these orders that are important, but then
Yes.
there are individual
Individuals.
dioceses that are
Right.
ordaining Black men. And then
Mm-hmm.
there are the Black men who are being ordained for the missions from the
Yes.
United States who are going to be in the missions in mostly in Africa,
And you know,
sometimes in the Caribbean.
being a Black priest myself, and I'm thinking, you know, much hasn't changed. I listen and I look at Tolton's life, and I see some of the same many struggles that we are still enduring in the 21st century as African American priests. And I don't want to shortchange the sisters too, because I want to just talk very briefly about these young women who want to become nuns and knocking at the door of these white convents and these white nuns not accepting them. And this is where Cyprian, I remember Cyprian said, these young women, you know, petition Rome and saying these white nuns they won't accept us because of the color of our skin. And the Pope said, start your own order. And so I remember Cyprian saying that. So if you could talk a little bit maybe about the Holy Family Sisters in New Orleans or the Oblate Sisters of Providence in Baltimore. These are two exclusive, and I think there's another one, the Immaculate Heart of Mary Sisters, if I'm not mistaken, African American women orders.
Well. Okay, I'll just briefly touch on now. Okay, I will say this. That particular part about the Pope coming in and saying start your own order, that doesn't apply to any of the orders that you just mentioned. I mean, it might apply to some other that I don't know about, but the Oblate Sisters of Providence we consider them to be the first order of African American religious sisters that was successful. There were a couple of tries of trying to do something, doing either Black order or integrated order a little earlier, but they did not succeed. The Oblate Sisters were women in Baltimore. The foundress, Mother Henriette DeLille, was part of the Haitian immigrant community, as were some of the other early sisters in that community. She worked with a Sulpician priest, Father Jacques Joubert. Even before she was a sister, she was teaching with other women, other Black Catholic women. They were conducting a school and they were praying together. And so the desire to have a life of prayer together and to serve together in a way that was useful to the Black community was something that they were already pursuing before they became religious sisters, and they did become religious sisters. And their charism was education, particularly educating Black girls. They are among the earliest of the religious communities established here in the United States. So we think about religious communities that have their origins in the U.S. The Oblate Sisters are among the very first. Let's say, my math is bad, but less than 20 years later, we're going to have the Sisters of the Holy Family established in New Orleans. And again, there were a couple of tries before the Holy Family Sisters were established to do some sort of integrated religious community of women in New Orleans. Those attempts did not succeed. And Henriette DeLille, who was a free person of color, as were all of the original members of her community, decides to establish this order. They have a hard time getting their order going, but they persist, as do the Oblate Sisters. All of these women persist. They persist. And their charism was different from the Oblate Sisters, but they are also going to be involved in education. They're also going to be involved in caring for the poor, and particularly elderly people who have been abandoned. So these are communities of women of African descent who have made a decision that they want to have a religious community and that they want to serve their people. The third order that is successful is the Franciscan Handmaids of the Most Pure Heart of Mary.
That's right.
And they get started in the early part of the 20th century. And I really love the story of the Franciscan Handmaids because they become part of the Great Migration. Their order starts in the South. It starts in Savannah, Georgia.
Right.
They go there to teach. I won't go into the whole story, but their reason for being there to teach dissipates, and so they are in Georgia without a mission, and the situation is very rough for them. And the Archbishop of New York calls upon them, hears that they're out there, calls upon them, invites them to come to New York. And they go to New York to start a daycare center for children of working parents in Harlem. Because Black people are moving, they're leaving the South, they're going into the North, they're settling in the major American cities, and they have to work, but who's going to take care of their children? So they start this daycare center called the St. Benedict the Moor Daycare Center. And for generations, those sisters take care of young children in Harlem. They then also get involved in teaching in Catholic schools in the community. And with all those sisters, they're going to have very strong missions in the cities where they were created. So strong service in New Orleans, Baltimore, and Harlem. But they'll also be called upon to come to other parts of the country to serve also. So, Oblate Sisters serve in two of the places I know they served in St. Louis. They served in South Carolina. I know that the Sisters of the Holy Family served in various cities around Louisiana, but they also were serving in California. And
that's right. They
Texas.
Sure were.
And the Franciscan Handmaids, they were called down to serve in North Carolina. These women end up serving in various places. Now, you've also got the story of women who were who were seeking to join orders of sisters that were historically white. And of course, a lot of very interesting, good work is being done on those sisters, and by Dr. Shannon D. Williams. So that's another story. And it's like, when you think about Black Catholic history, there's so many ways that you can, directions you can go. Like, you could look, like, what was happening in what was happening within Black Catholic communities.
Mm-hmm,
You can look at that history. You can look at what is the hierarchy doing as relates to African Americans.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
What are the interracial
Right.
examples of Catholic involvement?
Right.
There are just so many avenues you can go down and ways you can look at it.
And I'm wondering, with your inside history background, where do we go from here in the 21st century as African American Catholics? And I know we're not monolithic. We come from so many different angles and understandings and we hear the exodus, or some people call it the Black Exodus, Black people leaving the Catholic Church, some of us who are staying in the church. With all of your wonderful knowledge, where do you see us going now in the 21st century? Or what are your hopes, your aspirations, and where do you possibly see the direction of the Church for African American Catholics?
Well, I hope that and I choose to be hopeful. I choose to be hopeful that we will continue to have a future in the Catholic Church, that there will always be African American Catholics. I do think that one of the things that I think is changing is we have to expand our understanding of who all is part of the American Catholic community. And we've been blessed in that we have a lot of Catholics who are part of our parishes now who are immigrants from various African countries. I know in my parish here in Dayton, Ohio, we have a lot of families from Ghana. We have some families from the Cameroon. We have some families from Nigeria. And so that's where the youth is. They're the younger Catholics. They're the Catholics that are have children and larger families and intergenerational families. In terms of people who are Black and Catholic born and raised here, we're older. We just are. There are still some people born and raised Catholic in America who are young, but I think that's less and less the experience. And so I think about the experience of immigration. That's a very important way that Catholicism is growing in what we would call the African American experience right now. The way in the 20th century it grew by conversion. Real serious evangelization efforts, particularly through Catholic schools.
Yes, that's right.
Through the first half of the 20th century, children would learn about Catholicism in their schools, and they become excited about it and want to become Catholics, and so many of them would encourage their parents to convert. And so there are whole stories of families converting together.
Yes.
So that was the way of growing in the 20th century.
That's right.
I hope we could still do some of that in the 21st century. But I do think, and we have to understand that there are challenges because there are differences.
Yes.
There are differences. So there is as much need for us to learn about each other, to learn each other's histories and cultures, and to come to a sense of respect and appreciation.
Yes.
so that we can become a really cohesive
Right.
community.
And I like that because I don't aspire to the top down. I aspire from the bottom up. And I think, and I pray that those who are in positions of power and authority in our church would be sensitive enough to hear the voice of the grassroots Catholics and seeing the evolution and the change that is going on. And I think, that's my hope is that, the voice of, and I guess that's why I want to do this podcast for us so that we can hear the voice of those grassroots Catholics so that the people on the top can be sensitive to the spirituality, the intellectual, the emotional, and all of that good stuff that makes us who we are in our philosophy and our theology and our spirituality. And I think it's going to really come from the laity, to be very honest. I think the 21st century is going to be really for the lay folks to really step up to the plate to help us have these changes that are so desperately needed in our culture.
Yeah, I think that I agree with you, Father. I think that that's a really important observation because, again, like thinking about it historically, okay, well, so I was talking to my, because all right, so I teach this undergrad U.S. Catholicism class where you kind of like try to learn all of U.S. Catholic history from the 1500s up to today, if we can get there. We never get to today, but we try. But I also have a doctoral seminar, and we were reading a book today about the Catholic Youth Organization and its role in helping to shape a generation of Black Catholic leaders in Chicago in the 20th century. And one of the things that that was in the book was the CYO pledge. And one of the things that the kids who joined CYO promised was that they would essentially that they would honor the principles of Pope Leo XIII.
Yes.
Encyclical Rerum Novarum. And one of my students said, like that's gonna happen today. Like that there would be a CYO pledge that I will learn. And I will pursue, the teaching of Pope Francis, Laudato Si. Yeah. And I said, well, wouldn't it be great if kids today were being taught what Laudato Si was about, and also were being taught there's something you can do about that.
Right.
That there's a way for you to live out the principles that Laudato Si says are what Catholics should be doing. And so when we think about this time 100 years ago, we had very few Black priests. But we'll say 1922.
Right.
Just a very small handful of Black priests in America.
Right.
We had the 3 Black sisterhoods. By 1921, we had 3. The largest one was the sisters in the Sisters of the Holy Family.
Right.
The smallest being the Sisters in Harlem. So we didn't have like a lot of priests and sisters who could be the leaders. Now they did lead as they could, but it was dependent on the laity.
That's right.
It was dependent on the laity then, and they definitely worked with the priests and sisters. And so here we are again at the turn of the 21st century, and we have very small number of priests.
Yeah.
We have a much smaller group of Black sisters, probably. Now, the Black sisters are spread out now, and not just in the historically Black communities, but they're in historically white communities too. But they're not there in large numbers.
Right.
So yeah,
It's
Yeah.
the laity. And time, I know we're running out of time because we didn't even get a chance to talk about the Knights of Peter Claver and the role they played in the church. If you could just give us a synopsis real quickly.
I don't know a ton about it.
Okay.
I know a very little bit about the Knights, but the Knights, yes. I mean, the Knights they've been around for about 100 years.
Yes.
I think they're 1909, established
That's right.
in 1909.
By
And
Daniel who? Rugg is his last name, is that right?
not with the Knights of Peter Claver.
Okay, who was the founder?
The Knights of Peter Claver were founded by a group of laymen, of Black Catholic laymen, and some Josephite priests. They were established down in Mobile, Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
The Daniel Rudd established the Colored Catholic. He worked with
the Congress. That's
Black
the Congress.
laymen to
That's correct. He
establish
sure
the Colored
did.
Catholic Congress.
He sure did. Daniel Rudd did
Mm-hmm.
that. That's correct. Thank you for
And
that
the
correction.
newspaper.
That's right. Thank you for that.
But all those are great examples of laity when we're thinking about the Knights of Peter Claver, and also the people who were involved in the Colored Catholic Congress, Dr. Thomas Wade Turner and his the Federated Colored Catholics. These were lay Black Catholic initiatives looking for ways to bring about justice in the Catholic Church, which had injustices as they related to people of African descent, but also in the wider American society.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. We're out of time. And, part of the evangelization is what we're doing right now with the mass media. And I thank God for this moment with the podcast, because we want to do some good stuff like this each month to talk about where do we go from here as African-American Catholics in the 21st century. I want to thank you again, Dr. Moore, for your insight, your knowledge, and being able to share this wealth with us and hopefully to the whole world. Again, thank you again for all the good work you do.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
I pray blessings upon your endeavors.
Thank you. And I will see you this summer at Xavier University. Once again, thank you for joining us for this episode of African American Catholic Podcast. For more information and to get involved, visit my website at frroylee.com. Again, frroylee.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so we can spread that good news to those around us. I am Father Roy Lee, your host. Now, God bless you, and I hope to see you soon.